Okay, I get the lovely task of talking to you about the Indian Springs Water Company. That's what we are plaquing today. When you put together a town in the middle of the desert, one of the things you have to have is water. Rhyolite was platted in January of 1905. One of the things about Rhyolite is there's no water here, anywhere. There was no wells, there were no springs, there was nothing here. So you had to bring in water from somewhere. Initially, the water that came into Rhyolite came in by wagon. People had put together freight companies and they would bring in barrels of water, run that down the streets. So you would come out of your house and buy water from the freight company, and you would have barrels or cans at your home or at your business, buy the water that you needed every day and just keep it at your house. That got kind of expensive. It was $2 to $5 a barrel for water. Well, that was all right, except every night you would be losing water. Now, you weren't losing water because of evaporation. You were losing water because the burros would come in and drink it. It didn't matter how strongly you would put a cap on it. It didn't matter how strongly you would lash it down. Didn't matter what you would do. The burros could get past anything that you would do to try to keep them out of your water. Yes, in fact, that's the case. The memories of Earl Clemens, who ran the Rhyolite Herald here, the newspaper, was that if you made it really impossible for them to get into your water, they would just pull the bung out of your barrel and drink the water as it was pouring out of your barrel. So you didn't want to make it too hard. So that was not a good idea. So by the middle of 1905, the first water company to actually start bringing water in from springs far away was the Indian Springs Water Company. That's this property right here that Telly owns, and it allowed us to plaque. Indian Springs, many of you know the town of Indian Springs, where Creech Air Force Base is, right? We all know that. That's not what we're talking about. Like many other places, many other springs, there are multiple Indian Springs out there. The Indian Springs that the Indian Springs Water Company took the water from are shown on this map. I'll pass it around if you want to take a look at it. Don't steal it because it goes back to Telly. Go ahead and pass that around. Upper and Lower Indian Springs were on the other side of Beatty. They were 5 miles from here. And they actually had to order pipe from San Francisco, have it freighted all the way to here, and run pipe from Indian Springs, Upper and Lower Indian Springs, on the other side of Beatty, and run the pipeline over here. They had to have pumping stations on that pipeline to get the water to this site. They had 2 20,000-gallon tanks up on that hill, and they ran it down to here. They also had Terry Springs, and they initially had a 1-inch pipeline that brought water to here by July of 1905. At that point, you had to come up here to this site to get water. And interestingly, as soon as they had any water getting here, they advertised that the burros could drink for free up here at the headquarters. But as soon as they could, even before they had the main pipeline coming in here, they started running pipes down Golden Avenue. They were piping or putting in the infrastructure for water service to the entire city of Rhyolite. And they ran pipes down Golden Avenue, down Main Street, and then across into the entire city of Rhyolite. They eventually had 20,000 feet of pipeline throughout Rhyolite. They weren't the only company in 1905 that was eventually built here. You had the Patrick Line, which came from Beatty. They owned the Beatty Ranch, and they ran pipes from the Beatty Ranch where there were a number of small springs, and they piped water over here as well. They also ran pipes down Golden Avenue. And the Bullfrog Water Company, they ran pipes from Amargosa Valley down into Bullfrog and then piped the water up into Rhyolite. You can imagine looking down there where Bullfrog was, that water had to be pumped up into Rhyolite. There was no way that you could use gravity to run the water down here. You had to pump it up here. So when you're talking about the water that was running through Rhyolite, there was a lot of infrastructure that was being created here so that Rhyolite could have plenty of water. It was one of the interesting things about Rhyolite that by the end of 1905, early 1906, there was plenty of water coming into Rhyolite. You could tie in, and for $15, you could get a water service to your house. You could tie into the water, to the pipelines, have water coming to your house, and then you had to pay for the water you were using. For the first 1,000 feet of water that you used in a month, it was a penny a gallon. Then after that, for the next 4,000 feet of water, it was a half a cent a gallon. And then for every gallon you used after that first 5,000 gallons, it was a quarter of a cent a gallon. Kind of a different way of pricing things than the water district does today. When you think about it, I was talking to a couple of you yesterday about this, and we were thinking that's not the way we think of cost for water today. But it was probably set up that way because the companies that really used a lot of water were the big mines, the Montgomery Shoshone and things like that. And so they wanted them to be using the water because they wanted the mines working. And as the mines worked, that kept everybody employed, it kept the town booming, and all of this. That was a great idea. But Rhyolite had a problem. Rhyolite was based on money coming in from outside of Rhyolite. Rhyolite was booming until 1906, when there was an earthquake and fire in San Francisco. And San Francisco was where a lot of the outside funds were coming into Rhyolite. That really harmed Rhyolite. But we got the Las Vegas and Tonopah here, and we got the Bullfrog and Goldfield here. Those are the railroads. That's the depot back there. That's the Las Vegas and Tonopah. And those of us that came up from the south, we came up on Highway 95. That was the Las Vegas and Tonopah right-of-way. In case you wonder where that road came from, that was originally the LV&T. When that was torn out in 1919, the right-of-way was sold to the state of Nevada in order to create that road, just to give you an idea. But they were coming in here, but with that earthquake and fire, and then in 1907, you had the depression in Wall Street. And some of us have heard about Wall Street problems in our lifetimes. We haven't heard about anything like the September and October 1907 Wall Street problem, where Wall Street lost 50% of its value in 2 months in 1907. Between 1906, the earthquake and fire, and 1907, basically all the funding available for investment in Rhyolite went away. And so people started leaving Rhyolite. In 1907, basically early 1907, the estimates are there were probably maybe 3,000, maybe 3,500 people here. By 1910, the population of Rhyolite was down to, well, in the census of that year, it was about 640 here. So think about that. It had already dropped that much. And by 1920, it had dropped to 24 people here. It had gone away. Rhyolite was one of the great boom towns in the West. With all of the investment that went into water, there was electricity here, there were telephones here, all of that, it only lasted about 10 years as a community. But it lasted, and it was, the people that invested here thought this was going to be a real city that was going to last. It didn't. But the Indian Springs Water Company didn't go away. In 1925, the pipeline was rebuilt because the Montgomery Shoshone was reopened for a year. And then it was shut down again. And then it was reopened again in the 30s. And then it was shut down again. And in the late 1980s and 1990s, another company came in here. Some of you may remember this. And they basically reworked all the tailings here. And for those of us who were camping over at the gun range, as we drove out, all of those tailings piles were from over here. And that hill that we saw that had obviously been terraced and taken down, all of that was reworked at that time using a cyanide process. And they were taking out gold even then at the rate of a couple of cents per ton and making money on it at that point. Did a lot of damage to the ruins here, but nonetheless, it was reworked yet again. But there was no town left. You know, Rhyolite was one of the great boom towns and one of the ones that people have been coming back here for many years. Some of you will, as you're here, hopefully you'll walk around, you'll see the town itself. But what you see here, by the way, one little aside, and I should mention this, is the Indian Springs Water Company also installed 6 fire hydrants in town. Now, when you talk about boom towns in the West, nearly every one of them burned down at least a couple of times. Rhyolite never did. And that was partially because it had fire hydrants. It had an infrastructure in case there was a major fire. And there were a couple of fires, but never one that burned down the town. And they installed the fire hydrants, then they built the town. It was $250 for putting in those fire hydrants. And the town, which didn't have a town council or anything, but they had a chamber of commerce, and they said, okay, here's your $250. And then they went out and bought the pipes and the connections and all of that and the hoses that they needed to be able to use them, because they didn't have those, but they had them when they needed them. And they also had, by the way, 3 public pools. Can you imagine in this desert, they had 3 public pools. You had to pay to use them, but you could go swimming here. The middle of summer, you could actually use the public pools. And some people had enough money that they were willing to have lawns. If you had a lawn, it was anywhere from about $60 to $90 a month to pay your water bill. But some people wanted a lawn, or they wanted flowers, or they wanted trees. They would plant them, and we had enough water here because of the 3 water companies. They would have them, and they were noted. It's noted in the papers of the time that these were here. So the fact that they put in that much infrastructure gives you an idea of what they thought this town was going to be. But they couldn't expect that San Francisco was going to burn down and that Wall Street was going to lose 50% of its value and the ability to invest was going to go away. Yep, things happen. But that's what we've got here. Let's go ahead and pull this so you can see the plaque. But we like to let the world know some of our history when they come up here. And a lot of times it's very hard to understand our history when you come here and you just see some old buildings. So we really want to thank Telly for letting us place this plaque on his property. We want to make sure that visitors to Rhyolite can learn a little bit about the history of the Indian Springs Water Company, and this was the first water company to actually be able to have water coming into Rhyolite and was one of the important water companies that made Rhyolite actually bloom in the desert. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for being part of the dedication. And did we bring any extra copies of the keepsake?
Yes, I've got some in the truck.
All right. If anybody would like one of our keepsakes, I can tell you it is a wonderfully written, fascinatingly informative keepsake. I wrote it. So if anybody would like a copy, raise your hand. Where are you? Who's got them?
Not everyone at once. I have them. I just can't do it right this second.
Yeah, Vern can get them for you. So thank you all for coming.
Satisfactory.
Oh yeah, gotta get the PBCs up here with their monument.
Let me get this in the air.
It's good to have friends. I hope to someday. Yep.
Still waiting on the drone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where's craft services? Let's go.
That's right.